Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has dismissed international accusations that Israel is deliberately targeting and starving civilians in Gaza. Netanyahu described the killing of at least 45 civilians in a refugee camp near Rafah earlier this week as a, quote, tragic mistake. The Israeli military said it had targeted 2 Hamas leaders at the location. Israeli troops have pushed further into the southern city of Rafah in defiance of international pressure. Netanyahu insists his government's goal is to eliminate Hamas after the group launched the October 7th terrorist attack on Israel. Joining me now for more is Etgar Keret. He is one of Israel's most prominent authors and a vocal critic of Benjamin Netanyahu's government. Welcome, Mr. Keret. Thanks for making the time. You recently wrote in an article, and I'm going to quote from it, but I've shortened this slightly. There may be no clear direction, but there is one goal. Prime Minister Netanyahu wants to avoid being convicted in the 3 criminal cases against him for corruption, unquote. So this war is all about saving his skin?
I think that we are caught in a very strange situation in which the 2 people who have the greatest initiative that this war will never end are Netanyahu and Yahya Sinwar. Sinwar, as the head of the Hamas, knows at the moment that the war will be over. He will lose his power, maybe lose his life. It depends on the circumstances, but for sure will not control Gaza. And Netanyahu knows that the moment that this war will be over, the moment that there will be some kind of a break, the demand for election, the demand for a government that is widely supported by the public. I read in some of the polls that only 20% support Netanyahu as a prime minister at the moment. In a moment of war where everybody should be gathering around him. So it feels as if like this momentum of war, it's something that kind of slows down democratic processes, that keeps away some questions that you say, okay, we're going to ask them on a quieter day. And that's a very dangerous situation when the people in charge are basically holding the society in captivity. They're basically kind of leveraging reality for their own ends, and hundreds and thousands they have to pay for that. In their lives, they're being uprooted from their homes.
Right.
It's more apparent in Gaza, but this happens in Israel too, where people who were living in the northern part of the city didn't visit their home since the 7th of October when they were evacuated.
This war has been on for a little over 7 months, I think. Has Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made Israel safer since the 7th of October?
For sure it didn't, and I'm saying for a few reasons. One of them is that this government keeps inciting against everyone. The Prime Minister himself tweeted in the beginning of the war against the Chief of Staff and the head of the Secret Service, and all this idea of this government, we didn't know anything, it's just everybody else's fault. It causes a rupture in the society. Instead of us being in a situation where people will say, okay, here's a guy who acknowledges his mistakes, who think he did something wrong and wants to fix it, but what we have is a government that basically accuses everybody else for what's happening and doesn't assume responsibility, which rips the Israeli society apart. Apart from that, it's a right-wing government with many messianic and racist representatives in it, that basically, you go to Hague and you hear ministers saying things that I want to believe do not represent the Israeli spirit and the Israeli people. They're just kind of like hijacked, our democracy into that direction. And they're putting Israel in isolation from the Western world by taking actions like entering Rafah, attacking in Rafah in the ways that they've attacked, refusing American demands. All those kind of things are creating a situation in which basically we keep attacking in Gaza with no strategy, with no thought of the day after, with no thoughts of how this kind of a Palestinian society will get up from this war and be able to create something that can live by Israeli side and basically aspiring for a Palestinian state. But we're not doing it because in this government there are a few members who can take this government down who do not want a Palestinian state. So it seems as if like the political extremists are kind of waging the dog. Netanyahu in the end has to bend and to go on with their demands. Basically this has an effect of the kidnap not being able to return. Of course, Hamas is playing tricks and is unfair and is doing everything badly. But I think that as a citizen, I don't have a feeling on the other side that there is a government that its first initiative is to bring those citizens home. It seems as if the first initiative is to keep fighting Hamas.
You know, you have these views against Prime Minister Netanyahu, and you were saying a little earlier there's only 20% of the population that support Benjamin Netanyahu. But the Israeli public doesn't think the same, really, does it? Because it is just on Wednesday that the respected Channel 12 ran a Snap survey and found that the majority of respondents think Mr. Netanyahu is a more capable leader over his rival, Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz. So there is sizable support for Mr. Netanyahu, isn't there?
Yeah, but I think that what can be tricky about that is that when first of all, it's the first time in a very long time. When you do enough spins, then in a certain day you can rise a little bit over the people who are against you. But you must remember that the alternatives to Netanyahu are a few. So when you see how those percentages break, the question is not if he gets more than another person, but how many people actually support him. And and I'm saying we're in a situation where the majority of the public in all the poll says that this government should resign. Even among the people who supported the Likud, you have more people who are critical of the way of that this government had functioned and is functioning than people who are supporting it. So I think that the poll that you're talking about shows what a critical lack of leadership Israel is in. That Netanyahu gets more than his rivals because you don't recognize any charismatic alternatives that can get people around it. But one thing for sure, the majority of the people do not want Netanyahu. So if some of his supporters still stay with him and help him beat this little poll, it's okay. The important poll is that the majority of the public wants him to resign. And that, at some stages, 80% of them thought that he was unfit to be a prime minister.
Mr. Keret, you're one of Israel's most well-known authors. You're internationally acclaimed, and you write about the human condition in sometimes surreal and dark situations. I wonder, do you have some words that describe the situation with the war right now?
Well, for me, it feels more anarchistic and chaotic than anything. All my life, being a left-winger, I found myself fighting against a different ideology. But right now, I don't feel that as if I'm facing an ideology. There is no ideology. It's just a bunch of people that each of them has their narrow interests. Helping the ultra-Orthodox, helping the settlers, advancing homophobic agenda. It doesn't matter what it is. It's a cluster of bandits, that are basically snatching and changing whatever they can. And they even move in a very unpredictable and inconsistent manner. They can say one thing, they can say the other. But what stays behind it is very, very narrow goal. And all this thing is breaking the Israeli society apart because you don't have any figures that you can look to and say, here's a person, who leads me and who really think of all of us as a society, not only of helping his supporters and punishing the people who didn't vote for him.
We'll leave it there for the moment. But thanks so much for joining us today from Tel Aviv, Israeli author Etgar Keret. Pleasure talking to you, sir.